Hey everyone, Tom Salemi here. Before we begin the show, I wanted to follow up on a promise I made in the last episode. We're working on some very cool stuff here at Device Talks, including a new program called Device Talks Tuesday. The intention is to bring the excitement, the insight, the information, the contacts that you can find at our Device Talks events to you at your workplace, wherever that workplace is, whether it's the kitchen table, the dining room table, the home office, the basement, wherever you are stored away getting work done. We want to bring all of that to you. So stay tuned. We'll have more information for you shortly. We'll be launching this in a month or so, a couple of weeks actually, in the middle of May. So we'll have more information in next week's podcast, and a little breadcrumb for you. And if you absolutely can't wait, feel free to shoot me an email. I'll give you the email address at the end of the podcast. All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
Hey everyone, this is Tom Salemi, Editorial Director of Device Talks. Thanks for joining us on this week's episode of Device Talks Weekly. Before I begin my conversation with my podcast pal, Chris Newmarker, I just want to let you know what's on tap for today. We're going to hear from Mike McIlduff, the CEO of Edwards. I went on to Edwards' quarterly call and pulled some interesting comments about how Edwards is viewing the next few quarters. It's hopeful and interesting, and I'd be happy to share this with you. Plus, I'm going to talk with Mark McIlduff a little later. Mark is the general manager of U.S. operations at Avania. Avania is a newly named CRO, and Mark will get into its history in our conversation. But we'll also talk about the impact that COVID-19 has had on clinical trials. Finally, then Chris and I are going to hit upon some high points, including some really promising employment news and where we are with the Q1 reports. It's been an interesting time so far. And have some surprise and little scary news from one of MedTech's leaders. So now let's get into this conversation with Chris Newmarker, Executive Editor, Life Sciences at Mass Device. Hey, Chris Newmarker. We're here at episode 7 of Device Talks Weekly. Can you believe it? Lucky number 7.
Here we are. Lucky 7. Here we are, yeah.
So we're doing something a little differently this week. We're actually on Zoom looking at each other. So if we sound weird, that's why, because we can actually see each other. So we're not sure if this is going to help us or not, but we're going to give it a try. And eventually you lucky folks may get to see us as well.
Yeah, I might try to shave or trim my beard a little bit, before we do that then.
All right, Chris, it's been a really interesting week on Mass Device. I think you guys have had some great coverage in different areas. As we mentioned last week, this is a quarterly earnings period, and we can hit upon that in a moment. But I was struck by the number of employment news that came out. You had Baxter with some positive news, Conformis with some positive news, and Edwards. We'll have a snippet from Edwards' quarterly call. And in that, CEO Mike McIlduff came out and said, or at least management did, it might have been their CFO, said that they won't have any layoffs as a result of COVID-19. So we'll play that for folks in a little bit, but let's backtrack and talk a bit about Baxter. What is the news on Baxter?
Well, they've made the announcement they're going to hire 2,000 permanent and temporary workers, including 800 in the U.S. And this is because Baxter makes infusion pumps, which are sorely needed for people who have coronavirus who are in the hospital. And they also make dialysis machines, which, those are actually, the demand for those is going way up because unfortunately a lot of people who have severe cases of coronavirus, they need dialysis. They're having kidney failure problems. So, sad that this is why they're doing it. But at the same time, it's kind of showing, like, even as we're getting all this news, like all these layoffs, going on, and this economic devastation we're having in the United States and around the world. But, we're having medical device companies that are actually hiring because they're making the stuff that we need to save people's lives.
Yeah, I think we should go into this with the understanding that unfortunately any demand of business means that someone needs a disease that needs to be treated.
Yeah.
But the jobs are good news. I think on the startup front, that someone had suggested it was a bloodbath out there, that there are a lot of startups that are just having their funding pulled. They're not able to conduct clinical trials. They're not able to move projects forward. So investors are like, you know what, we're going to take those dollars back for now, and we'll reconnect perhaps once things settle down. So maybe for some folks, this provides an opportunity for them to get back on the workforce.
And kind of going along with that, part of the stimulus that Congress has passed to try to revive the economy includes these SBA paycheck protection
The
and
PPP.
loans, these PPP loans, which are really grants. As long as you keep you don't lay people off after you take the money, you can you don't have to pay it back. And we're actually getting more stories of medical device companies that are taking advantage of those to keep their employees, or in some cases even bring them back from furlough. That was actually the story that we had with Conformis, was that they were bringing back their the employees that they had furloughed because they're getting a $4.7 million PPP loan. So
that's great news about Conformis, because I think we actually mentioned that on the first or second episode that they were having the layoffs, and they're one of the ones who they do customizable orthopedic implants. So of course, with the dialing back of elective surgery, they were hit hard. So it's great that they have a bridge that maybe will get them to the point where we're starting to open the hospitals back up again.
Exactly. I mean, like we don't want to see. I mean, it was already sad news a week or two ago when we heard that. That Second Sight, which had some really innovative, technology for helping people who had, vision difficulties, that they were winding down because of all this. We don't want to have any more news of medical device companies closing down, or really companies closing down in general.
That's right. That's right.
Good to hear that these loans seem to be helping out, and these companies are bringing people back or avoiding layoffs.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And let's go back to quarterly earnings. So Edwards released their quarterly earnings this week, and they had their call this week. They had good numbers. You actually got an article out last night. I think it was a fairly positive report.
Yeah, they beat the street. So, on the first quarter, and it sounds like they need it, because their CEO was saying that they're expecting a tough second quarter.
That's right. In fact, why don't we take a minute to listen to these comments from Edwards' quarterly call. This is CEO Michael McIlduff.
So it's a good question, Bob, and this is very tough to do. So we know that it's a challenging time to estimate revenues. We're starting to see positive signs already, and so in the tone and the tenor, we hear people preparing themselves to start recovery, and we know that that's going to take some time. We also know that the diseases we treat are very serious, and that we expect those diseases are not easy to postpone. And we know that many of the patients that might have been treated in Q1, Q2, and so forth might indeed be treated in Q4. And so it's the combination of those factors that encourage us to say that we're likely, and again, there's a broad range of possibilities, but we're likely to be in a more typical volume situation in Q4.
There's a feeling, and we've talked about this issue before, sort of the patients who need the care but aren't going to the hospitals. There's a feeling that they're going to begin to return. So
right, yeah, exactly. Like they, I mean, like in the case of Edwards, like one of the really big products is, transcatheter aortic valve replacements, these TAVRs, which are it's been a really innovative technology. And kind of the spooky thing right now is they're saying there's a lot of people who need a heart valve replacement who are debating, do I really go into the hospital right now, because of everything going on, because I don't want to risk exposure to someone with coronavirus.
That's very true. In fact, Mike McIlduff spoke to that point as well.
Yeah, no, it's very real. One thing for sure, David, is our patients were scared. They're afraid of COVID, and it's meant that they have, in many cases, decided to stay home. So there's many factors that influence the recovery, but if you do think of it as a funnel, there's been a bunch of patients that are waiting. So beginning the screening process again, and that really needs to begin months in advance of the fourth quarter, is going to be key. It's going to be a big effort by the whole community, but I think the community is going to come to grips with the fact that these heart valve patients and AS patients in particular really need to be treated, and that they're in a dangerous situation, and we think that they're going to respond to that. So right now, the screening rates have not returned to prior levels, not even close, but we're anticipating that that's going to happen, and that's what will cause Q4 to be what it is.
If you need a heart valve replacement, you're a sick person, and you need that help. So, I mean, they will get this, eventually. So, and yeah, that's kind of, is a big thing. They're saying, yeah, Q3, Q4, we're gonna be recovering. And you heard the same thing when you listened to Abbott's earnings call.
It was a very similar line of thought. So maybe it'll be something that we'll hear a lot of. Maybe it's wishful thinking on part of executives, but obviously everyone issues the caveat, provided that things continue to improve with COVID-19. I mean, if there's a resurgence or anything unfortunate happens, then
right.
Obviously everyone is affected, including the medtech industry. But there is some hope that things will begin to return and that patients will begin to come back to hospitals. We talked last week. You mentioned the New York Times article about where are all the stroke patients, where are all the heart patients. The Boston Globe, I'm in Boston, had a similar article this morning, and they're talking about folks who had fewer appendix cases. Like everything is just ratcheting down, and folks literally are scratching their heads wondering, where are all these sick people? In fact, they're saying in this article, it kind of surprised me. It's like, oh, you can come to the hospital. It's perfectly safe. We've got this all figured out. It's probably one of the safest, most COVID-free environments you can find, which seems to encounter what they were telling us 2 weeks ago. Was like, just stay away, stay away. So, so maybe we're on the upswing, and maybe we're on a path toward some kind of normal, although it's going to be interesting to see how hospitals operate in the near future.
Well, the device industry historically, we've been, at least somewhat recession proof, just simply because there's stuff that people just need, and even stuff that people might not quite need, like even like the orthopedic companies where somebody's like, well, I mean, if your knee really hurts, you want a knee implant. Maybe you don't need the knee implant, but you really want the knee implant. And and if you've got the insurance or something to pay for, you're going to get the knee implant. So I mean, even then, but I mean, it's really scary when you're hearing that people who might be having like symptoms of like heart trouble or am I having a stroke? I mean appendix? Like, oh my appendix seems to really hurt. I might want to have that out, but I don't want to talk to anybody about it. I mean, that's really scary stuff. And actually, the New York Times had a great analysis on average death rates of different cities around the world and how the death rate over the last month was different. And there's thousands of more deaths than what you'd expect with the official counts with coronavirus. And you got to wonder. Is part of that because there are people, you might be starting to have symptoms of heart attack. You don't check it out. Next thing you know, you're dead.
In fact, in this last clip from Edwards' call, Mike McIlduff discusses that very point, that Edwards suspects that patients who would have been in line for TAVR or some other treatments, unfortunately, are no longer with us. Let's listen.
This is a really tough time for patients. And ultimately, there may be some structural heart patients who delayed the treatment who never get treated. And just because of the deadly nature, some are not likely to survive. I know if you just run the numbers here, it gets to be an extraordinary large group of patients, and that distresses us greatly. It's just a difficult time. The disease is clearly progressive. And so we know about some patients already anecdotally who have passed away on the waiting list, which is very sad. But no, this is a tough time as the world has turned their attention to COVID. It's not a great set of conditions for structural heart patients.
So, and as we've heard from Mike Musalem, there's also the understanding that some of those patients who would have undergone procedures with Edwards devices and implants, unfortunately, were victims to COVID-19, because a lot of those people obviously are the most vulnerable to the disease. So
Right.
it's going to be interesting and tragic to sort of see how that impacts projections. I don't think it'll affect market sizes tremendously, and that's obviously not the most important thing. But this is we're going to be working through this for a long time, trying to understand exactly what the impact of this pandemic has been on medtech companies and medtech patient populations.
Totally. And the word I keep on seeing in the earnings reports that are coming out is, unpredictable. Um, like they did, they're some of the companies are trying to grapple with how this is going to affect their revenues and profits for the year, but you hear the word unpredictable a lot. And I've been a business reporter long enough that I know that businesses hate the word unpredictable. You want to have some kind of predictability, and we're definitely not in a predictable time period for sure. So here's to hoping we times get a little less interesting over the next year or so.
Absolutely. And one thing that remains unpredictable is our when we're going to get back to clinical trials. And to find a little bit more about the state of clinical trials, I spoke with Mark McIlduff. Mark is the U.S. General Manager at Avania, a CRO that you probably know, but is now sporting a new name. I'll let Mark provide the details behind Avania and how he views the clinical trial environment. And then Chris and I will be back to talk about some concerning news from Medtronic. Let's listen. Well, Mark McIlduff, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, Tom, thank you for having me.
So we're going to talk COVID-19, as everyone is these days, but I wanted to first learn a bit about your company. It's sort of taken on a new form, a new shape, and a new name. So tell us a bit about Avania.
Sure. So Avania is recently rebranded. You might know of us more as Boston Biomedical Associates. We came together with global medical device CROs with locations in the Netherlands and in Australia, factory CRO in Five Corners, back in December of 2018. Over the last year or so, we've been working on some integration and rebranded in March of 2020 as Avania. About 130 employees worldwide, and looking to be the kind of largest med tech focused full service CRO in really maintaining our main clientele in the medical device space.
So let's rewind a month or so and talk about when COVID-19 sort of originally or officially became COVID-19. What was the impact like for Avania and for some of the tests you were running for your clients?
We were probably, I guess, 2 weeks lag out of Europe. So we saw kind of what was going on in Italy first, I think, is when it really started to hit that trials were going to change from this point forward. And a lot of our studies that were going on in Europe with the Netherlands team, those sites were coming to a close probably 2 weeks ahead of the US sites coming to a close, and really tracking what the IRB and the FDA is kind of guiding us to do is, assess and document, but there is some leeway into being creative with the data collection and trying to get the data points for active patients that may be actively enrolled or in follow-up for any active clinical trials. I think, one major impact for our clients that may have been in startup is obviously some delay at the sites. We saw a lot of sites here send home non-essential personnel or reroute them within the hospital to kind of fight the pandemic. So some studies that were in startup that's either been delayed or come to a slow pace. And, being a global company that works on device products, we have a number of clients running trials in the US, but shipping their devices from Europe or from Asia. So we've seen an impact there, and just being able to get the devices in or being able to get the sponsor companies into proctor cases. So a little bit of delay and rerouting our own personnel to either different products that might be coming to us for consultancy advice and trying to get through to the FDA and get through to helping patients. So we've been working with a number of clients looking for emergency use authorizations through the FDA. That's been a big change.
And looking at the trials of your clients, explain to me sort of what happens when you've started a trial, you're maybe a third of the way through, and suddenly the patients aren't allowed to come to the facility anymore, or the people who are working on it are reassigned to something more critical. What happens to that trial?
Yeah, so we tried to triage each project based primarily on patient safety. So we do have a number of trials with active implantable devices that may require, a field clinical engineer to kind of reprogram that device. In those cases, we're reaching out to the sites to see if the patients can come in for their follow-up. If not, we're trying to accommodate anything with telehealth or home health visits as well. I think, a number of the trials that had either enrollment ongoing or enrollment complete, we're still trying to collect as much of that primary endpoint data as possible. I think FDA has been very good and proactive with releasing guidances, really document your risk assessment of where the trial is, document what you're going to do with any protocol deviations for missed visits or visits out of window. And then they'll be open to working, I think, with the sponsor and with us in the future to really make sure that the statistical analyses and the documentation of evidence of both safety and efficacy, I think, may turn to a pre and post COVID type of subgroup analysis. So I think it's really trying to understand where each project is on a project by project basis, and then documenting your decisions at this point and documenting how you want to move forward and have the evidence to support the filing down the road.
And let's talk about some of the work you are doing. You kind of referenced this earlier on. You are doing in COVID-19. What sort of opportunities and new clients have appeared at your virtual doorstep, I guess, with perhaps new tests or new tools to battle COVID-19, and how are you able to assist them and put together trials or at least some sort of evidence of proof that what they're doing will be effective and helpful?
Sure. Yeah. So at least in the U.S., the FDA has been, again, very proactive with this emergency use authorization, and really across several departments and therapeutic areas at the agency. Um, and we've had a number of clients come to us for, I guess, consultancy and regulatory submission help and support. This is across some diagnostic tests, some antibody tests, ventilators, blood filters, blood products, and then PPEs or personal protection equipment. Each really has a different set of requirements with the FDA in terms of what kind of preclinical or clinical evidence they'll require to grant emergency use authorization. So I think it's been a collaborative effort from the agency as well as industry to try to get as many of these hopefully life-saving products to the clinics as soon as possible.
Is any effort go into, I mean, what level of testing goes into demonstrating that these products will be effective? I mean, obviously you're not working with patients who have the disease. What's a baseline to demonstrate that, and again, I'm sure it varies from product to product, but what's a typical baseline that you need to meet to demonstrate that something works?
Yeah, so I guess we could take a recent blood filter that received their EUA. So that branch at the FDA required benchtop testing. So any preclinical or verification of the device be completed, either preclinical animal data or clinical in human data. This device happened to have outside the US as well as US clinical data, granted early feasibility studies and not data that would support a marketing application, but data nonetheless that showed safety and effectiveness. And then there's some commitment from the manufacturer to try to collect data at this time and support kind of ongoing research. So while it's minimal data collection and we're not trying to put a burden on sites, products that are released through the EUA, we're hoping to either retrospectively or minimally prospectively collect data on the safety and effectiveness of the products that the FDA is pushing through to the clinics.
Are you going to be going back, do you think, and running more thorough testing on a lot of these products that have secured EUAs?
Yeah, that's the intent, and kind of what's being discussed, I guess, is we'll be hopeful that some of the data collected now, even though it might not be a schedule of assessments or a data collection set that's as robust as a clinical trial, we're hopeful to use some of that data towards a marketing application. But yeah, I think, like you alluded to, there'll be some expectation for further evidence and documentation to get their product officially on the market for sale.
And are you and your clients tracking that data now, or is that something that sort of gets picked up after this is all after things settle down?
So we're in discussions with the FDA on about 20 EUAs. I think we've had 2 successfully kind of get through, and then the manufacturers are just now getting the products to sites. The idea there is to probably go back retrospectively in a patient's chart to collect the data for those 2 products. The others that we're hopeful to get there, I think it's a case-by-case basis on what would be minimally impactful to the site staff at the time of using some of the devices, and then ultimately what will give both the sponsor and FDA, I guess, confidence several months from now in these medical products. So
interesting. And just final question: do you see any new methods or new ways of conducting trials and collecting evidence, collecting information, collecting data that you think you'll be taking forward after this is all over? Will telehealth play a bigger role? Will there be other, electronic remote uses that can be employed to maybe make trials more efficient or get them done more quickly?
All of the above is really going to see an increase in, we're already seeing a lot of acceptance with the IRBs right now, but in the future as well, and some acceptance with the FDA and agencies in Europe and Australia that they're going to be accepting of more creative approaches and less invasive or less burdensome. I think the patient ultimately is the hope. So taking the burden off the patient, placing it on some creative ways to collect the data. We're seeing a lot before this, even with just monitors that the patients are wearing, Apple Watches, Fitbits, etc., and being able to leverage some of that data into different submissions and health, economic and utility outcomes. So.
And how does that present itself? You mentioned the Apple Watches and the other devices we're seeing. Is it simply that, or do you see yourselves and other companies running trials? I don't know, coming up with new cloud-based tools or just other methods of engaging more parties. What does clinical trial management look like in 5 years or so?
Yeah, I wish we knew, but I think it's quite a bit of increase in the telehealth and the remote visits from site staff to patients. There's, was a huge push for direct access to EMR and patient medical records to collect data in a more efficient manner. I think that this probably accelerates that effort as well. And, there's also a push for doing trials virtually and with AI. So I think that's more less patients, more simulated data, different inventive ways to get products to market faster with the burden off the patient, but ultimately trying to get products that will help the safety of patients suffering from these diseases in a quicker and more efficient manner. And maybe that's a positive that comes out of the pandemic.
All right, Mark. Well, I appreciate your taking the time and giving us an overview of a very important part of medtech. So thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Tom, and we appreciate the work you guys are doing to keep people informed and keep people engaged, even though there's less frequent networking opportunities than in the past.
Well, we'll find new ways to do it. Thank you for that. We'll find new ways to do it and hopefully get back to the old ways sometime soon.
Okay, great.
All right. Well, it was great to get a clearer view of the clinical trial picture. Before we wrap up this episode, though, I think one of the larger items, at least that I found interesting, was Medtronic releasing some an advisory on their financial picture. What did they say, and any insights on what it means?
Well, the interesting thing about Medtronic is that they don't, their earnings, their fiscal year doesn't coincide with the calendar year. So, while a lot of the earnings we're seeing right now are for, quarters ending March 31st, Medtronic right now is, finishing up their fourth quarter, which ends April 24th. So anything we get from Medtronic, there's kind of like an extra month there of like, how is this affecting, their earnings? So they're giving us a nice peek into what's going on, and it's grim. They're saying like right now they're seeing a weekly revenue hit of like, they're down 60% in the
Wow.
U.S. amid the COVID-19 pandemic. So, I expect things just as grim when we, get those, second quarter results then from, a lot of other companies that right now are warning us, hey, our second quarter is going to be brutal. I mean, they're not using the word brutal, but that's basically what it means. They're going to have a brutal
resetting expectations for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
So do you think Medtronic is going to be an outlier in this, or are we seeing more? Do you expect to see more of this sort of news?
I think it's more of an indication of where everybody else is going to, a lot of other companies are going to be too, when we find out, we really get to see how their second quarters went.
Oh.
So,
all right.
Yeah.
Well, if folks want to track that, there's no better place than Mass Device. You and the Mass Device team are all over those earnings. I'm amazed at how quickly you turn these reports around. So
yeah, we're churning it out. So.
And that's it for this week's episode of Device Talks Weekly. Chris, where can folks find you on social media?
Well, they can find me at Newmarker on Twitter. That's just like a new marker, and I'm also on LinkedIn. So always happy to take questions, comments, insights from people. I love to network.
Absolutely. And I am on Twitter. I am at MedTechTom. I'm on LinkedIn at Tom Salemi, of course. And email is tssalemi@wtwhmedia.com. And Chris is at cnewmarker at same wtwhmedia.com. So folks, thanks for joining us on this episode. Chris and I actually still are looking at each other, so it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out on the podcast episode. But do subscribe if you've enjoyed this podcast. It'd be great to have this sent directly to you. Share this on social media, the aforementioned social media channels, and connect to Chris and I so we can be part of that conversation. And that's it. That's a wrap. Tune in next week for another episode of Device Talks Weekly.
Thanks a lot. Stay safe.